Hello and welcome to another Ammach Project Archives episode. In this one, we're following the conference series, which took place 2012 in Nottingham on the 1st of September at the Britannia Hotel. One of our speakers, the next you'll hear, is MIKE ORAM, and I had the great privilege of having Mike accept to be part of the Eclectia album. Now, the Eclectia album, which was released in 2018, is an iconic compilation album featuring not a genre of music, but a genre of person. That is, nearly every single contributor on the album has had some kind of experience. Now, it's not all face-to-face ET stuff, but a lot of it is. And nearly all of them have provided sound bites as well to give you the kernel of their experience, a real snapshot of something major that absolutely defines their philosophy in this life as who they are. And the track which features on the Eclectia album is Travelers, which you will also hear in this presentation. He has had so many experiences, a lifelong experiencer, and also had an abduction around Area 51, which we don't get to hear about in this episode, but in the documentary of Eclectia, you will hear it there. Meanwhile, there's a lot more that's really amazing, not least his 4-year-old citation to his mother, informing her that she was not his real mother. And he said, yes, you brought me here on Earth, but actually my family are my space family, words to that effect. So I hope you're going to enjoy this very fascinating presentation with great MIKE ORAM.
MIKE ORAM is next, and MIKE ORAM's book, Does It Rain in Other Dimensions, is going to be the basis of his talk.
Right, it's lovely to be here, have the opportunity to talk to you, and I would just quickly like to thank the organisers because, believe me, it is a lot of hard work putting these things together. Now, I've done something which probably isn't very wise 2 days ago. I decided to change the PowerPoint and I spent 12 hours on Thursday. The reason being is, although now I'm here, there's lots of faces here that I do not know, so I may have made a mistake because I've taken out the bit of where we had the missing time at Area 51 because it takes 45 minutes to tell. And I've been talking about this around the UK, Europe and America since 2008. And I know that there's several people that follow the conferences around that have been through it 2 or 3 times. And I panicked and took it out. But if any of you do want to hear it, have a word with Joanne afterwards and perhaps I'll get invited back because I probably will only do that now if I'm specifically asked to do it. This is my book, Does It Rain in Other Dimensions? I decided to write the book and it wasn't till myself and my partner Fran had 2 hours of missing time, but it actually went on for over 24 hours. When we visited Area 51, Fran actually said she'll never step foot back in America again because of what happened to us. It was because of that and because of my experiences with the light beings and the symbols that they gave me for consciousness change that I decided perhaps it was time to put down some of the things that have happened throughout my life. Now, this is my mum and my sister, and that's me there in her arms. I was born in the East End of London, in Stratford, where the Olympics were being held. In 1951. That's my dad on the left-hand side there. This was in the Second World War in Rome. Now, I'll show this image because this is the earliest memory I have, around about the age of 4. I tend to tell this one because, as I say, it's the earliest memory I have of something unusual that happened to me. I had a conversation with my mother, which she actually talked about right up until she died about 18 years ago. Some people have said to me, how did a child of 4 use such terminology? But I seem to have visions in what I suppose you would call your third eye centre, and words seem to come along with these images to explain to my mother. And I started off by saying to her, what I could see first of all, I could see this hole in the ground, and a body was put in and it was covered over with soil. And I explained that to my mother, and I said, look, once that's covered over with soil, I said, the universe goes on forever. And what I'm telling you now are the exact words that I told my mother, or more or less. And I said, the universe goes on forever, and for us to never play a part in that universe again did not make sense. So I said, we have to come back. I think I didn't use the word reincarnation, but I think I was trying to explain about the soul's incredible journey throughout this evolving universe. And I then went on and said to her, and also, Mum, you're not my real parents. And she was a bit shocked, and she stepped back, and she said, well, of course we are. She said, you were born in this house. And I said, well, you're my parents as far as bringing me onto this earth, but my real parents are out there in space. And I pointed up into the sky. And I then went on and said, and also, Mum, something of incredible importance is going to happen on this planet that will affect all units of consciousness, whether it be mineral, vegetable, animal, or man. I said, not in your lifetime, Mum, but in mine. Now, all these years later, what I believe I was trying to say is that there is going to be some sort of shift of consciousness, some sort of shift of perception that will enable us to perhaps step into a new reality or create a new reality, and possibly, if this doesn't happen, we may not survive as a species. I don't know. But I've been told by the light beings and by my space brothers that this is going to be changed at the level of our DNA, and I'll touch on a bit more about that later. I'm going to jump ahead now because there's lots of things that happened throughout my childhood, but there's only so much I can tell you in 1.25 hours. So I'm going to move on to another time in my life that had a massive impact on me. And it was 1970 when I had a landing, and I met my space brother. I'd met him several times throughout my childhood. But this had a massive impact because I'd had a sighting of what you would call a mothership. I didn't know at the time, but it was over 1 mile in length, and a part of my consciousness went into the craft, and it was eventually put into flying saucer review. But there was a man, in fact, he's sitting over here somewhere, Graham Cowell, over the back there. He actually found his way through that article to my house, and we were talking, and he said to me, have you ever been to Warminster? And I said, never heard of it. And he said, well, I'll take you down next weekend if you want. And we went down there, went up Cradle Hill. Now, I don't know how much people know here about Warminster, but in its heyday, it was probably the most famous place in the world, and people came from all around the world to go to Warminster. We went up on Cradle Hill on a Saturday night, and there were over 200 people up there standing around in groups talking. Now, up to this point, or just prior to my experience being put into flying saucer review, I used to think I was the only person on the planet that was meeting people that didn't come from here. And I'm not saying that all these people on Cradle Hill had contact, but the thing is, all these people, their minds were open enough for them to be up there to try and find out what was happening. So I've got boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff at home. Magazines going back to the early 50s, all my newspaper cuttings, investigations I've done going right back to the 60s. And there's nowhere to put them. They're all piled up in one room. And I was going through some of the boxes just a few months ago, and I actually found the paperwork that I wrote after the meeting in 1970. So I'll share that with you just in a moment. Now this is Star Hill, that's the copse on Star Hill, known as Middle Hill on the maps. Scratchbury and Battlesbury are ancient hill forts, Iron Age hill forts. This is where the landing was. Now this here is, start off here, Cradle Hill, say, was over this way of town. Star Hill was the opposite side of town, and you came out onto the Salisbury Road, and you took this little lane down here, went over this incredibly short, steep, humpback bridge, and down to what they called the barn at the end of Star Hill. There's a little track here, and beyond this was the edges of Salisbury Plain, and this was military land. Now UFOs used to come along, not always, but they used to follow the contour of Scratchbury Hill. It was amazing to see them do that, and they would come down and go over to the top of Star, and some of them would stop over the copse at Star. We'd be standing down here, and we were only young, and we treat it sometimes like parlour games because we used to see so many incredible things, and we did get a bit blasé about it, and we would like flash, say, the torch at this incredible craft that was hovering over the copse. Might flash the torch 3 times and the whole thing would go on and off 3 times. And a couple of times we even tried it 7 times and it obliged. And sometimes lights would come out and they would surround us, stopping here and down by our exit here. I've got a whole chapter in my book. It's only some of the stuff that happened in Warminster. And once we had this incredible burst of brilliant white light that hit us and the car. And the car started to play up. It was getting electrical problems. And when we took it to a garage, the mechanic put his spanner on the bonnet and it stuck to it. It was like the car had got magnetised. So I'll share with you now what I wrote down back then of the meeting. The bright star moved down over Scratchbury Hill, followed the contours of the summit and came down into the field immediately in front of me. There it hovered just a few inches above the ground, sparkling and jewel-like, enticing me to move closer and observe. I walked nearer this glittering diamond from the sky and waited. I felt the blood pulsing through my veins. Both my heart and mind were eager in anticipation of what would happen next. Then, a section of this glowing sphere grew more radiant, and from this radiance stepped 2 men. 2 beautiful-looking men with shoulder-length silver hair and dressed in shiny silver clothing. The taller man held up his hand, palm open with fingers pointing towards the sky. And in my mind I heard the word, welcome. I automatically held my hand in the same way. Some years later I formed a band called Storyteller and composed songs about my experiences. And it may be appropriate here at this stage to let the song Travellers speak for itself. Now, I started this band in the late 80s into the 90s for the specific purpose. I wrote all the songs and they were all about my contact experiences, my spiritual experiences and my spiritual knowledge. And it was a way to get to an entirely different audience who may not necessarily have access to the nature of this other reality. And so I thought I could do it through my songs. So this song is called Travellers, and it was written about this landing at Star Hill in 1970.
I saw a spaceship flying across the sky. It landed upon a
further than... Oh, thank you. No further than 2 meters away were men from another system, another dimension. And still we hear talk of pilots chasing Venus through the night sky. Confused humans watching shooting stars stop and hover and then disappear back into the deep ocean of space in absolute silence. Yes, we are controlled at all levels in our society, and the media does its best not to inform us of the true nature of reality. But when will we stop and think and open our minds to who we truly are? Humans are slaves to the system. A system deliberately set into place to allow no time for the majority of humans to think outside the box. They are either struggling, looking for a bowl of rice to feed their family for that day, or are working hard to pay the mortgage and credit card bills, while the fat cat bankers and heads of industry award themselves sums of money that are beyond our understanding. This self-defeating system is spiralling out of control and will eventually destroy itself. Cyclical environmental changes, possibly activated or helped by group mind, will unleash the forces of nature upon this earth, which will remind the memory, locked into our DNA, of similar catastrophic events when land descended to the ocean floor, allowing new land, sunken from the past, to rise once again. You must open your mind, I was told, before it is too late. How do you think you will react when faced with the knowing that you have trapped yourselves? It did not have to be this way. You are fast heading towards the final stages of your transition. Energies are approaching from somewhere near the centre of your galaxy that will give you the opportunity for change, the opportunity to shift your awareness and your eternal self into a higher dimension, a higher frequency, where you will find new horizons and become part of a much larger family and play a much more responsible role in the unfolding of this universe. You are, all of you, independent sparks of consciousness from the Prime Creator, the source of all that is. We are also aware of the universal law of free will, and we will not impose ourselves upon those who do not seek for enlightenment. We are here this evening in answer to your calling, and we warn you now of the dangers your planet faces in the upcoming years. She will need your help to bring her through into the new reality, the transition into a higher frequency dimension. Too many people are still asleep, numbed into submission. They stare into their TV screens and read the headlines of their newspapers and accept their lot. He then smiled, and I noticed as he looked down a mischievous glint in his eye as he continued, "And they think you are weird, the strange boy who chases lights in the sky whilst talking of life on other planets. In the next few years, we will show ourselves more in the skies in the hope of waking up some of these lost souls. And you must play your part in the telling of this cosmic tale. Stay focused and true to yourself. Take time to meditate and concentrate your mind on your inner divine being. This will be your unfailing guide as we enter the troubled times of not only Gaia's transition, but also the up-tempo beat of control in your society. Whatever is thrown at you now, do please believe us when we tell you that they are frightened men. They need to keep the frequency down in order for their own survival. Otherwise, they will find their lives changed forever. And whether they accept their karmic debt or not, the balance sheets will need to be balanced. Yes, the ride ahead may be difficult, and that is entirely up to you and what you intend to do about the events being set into place. But the final transition will be glorious to behold." The two men looked down and smiled, their bodies glowing silver in the dark night. The craft, which seemed sentient itself, watched and waited for the command to allow them to re-enter. They once again held their hands palm forward with fingers pointing to the sky. As they stepped backwards, the craft increased its brilliance, and I knew this magical moment was about to end. They turned and walked through the radiant diamond as if blending into the essence of light. They returned from whence they had come, and the craft retreated to the starry heavens. I stood for ages, I'm not sure how long, and wondered how many of those countless suns shining in the firmament also supported life. Eventually I made my way back home, driving the car along the dark track and back to the main road, all the time scanning the sky for any sort of movement, in the vain hope of a sudden return of the radiant sphere of light. I had met these men before, and I was quite sure we would meet again in the not too distant future. When, I was never sure. So that was Storyteller in 1992, and that's where the landing happened at Star Hill in 1970. I eventually moved to Warminster. I used to go down every weekend, every other weekend I would leave work and drive straight down there. In 1977 I moved down there and lived there for a number of years, and in 78 my friend from New York, an artist, Mike Brinkerhoff, who had the same contact with the same group of people, we were both taken one evening onto the craft, and when we came back he grabbed a notepad and a pen, and he'd done these two sketches and presented them to me of the people that we are in contact with, and this is how they appear to us. Now, we were young. I mean, we was only 18. Although we took the subject incredibly seriously, we did have a lot of time to sort of get through in the daytime, and that's me on top of Cradle Hill trying to look like an alien. And that's me being squashed against the white gates, and these gates were quite famous in those days. Behind there was the military road, which you weren't allowed to go up, and we often used to, and they were never too pleased. They somehow found out, and they would come up in a jeep and bring us back down. When I went there to research the book with Fran in 2005, the gates had been taken down and they'd opened up a lot more land, and it was really quite wonderful. But when I went back for a reunion up Cradle Hill a couple of years back, they were putting them all back, and they seemed to be taking even more land than before, and their excuse was that the dog mess was ruining their night manoeuvres. This is a dear friend of mine, John Bennett. In those days, he was with me on many of our memorable experiences, and that was the infamous first copse behind him, where lots of strange things happened in those early years. Another dear friend there from that time, Chris Truebridge, and here he is doing his simian impressions. We'll have to leave this one now. This is something that Mark photographed when we were both on top of Scratchbury Hill. I've told this so many times. It's when I arranged for a flying saucer, if you like, a UFO, to come for my dad, because he never believed me, and it did, it obliged, and it is the most amazing experience. The tiger, we'll have to leave that, and we'll have to leave when I was a baker's roundsman, because that's the thing that was put into Flying Saucer Review. And I also do a cartoon called Ben's World. Some of you would have seen these things. I've got about 400 strips done now. I do all the writing. I write and sing songs as well, put them onto CD. My friend John does all the artwork, so we'll have a bit of fun here, how it all began. There's Gordon, and there's little Ben, the dog. Ben, I suppose, is me. He philosophises about life, and he likes looking out for flying saucers, but he's also a cheeky little dog. And there's also Lucy the cat. So Gordon is here saying, just look at all those millions of stars, Ben. It's ridiculous to say that no other life form is out there. I wonder how we'd react if we suddenly came face to face with an alien being. And little Lucy is coming in on the scene there, and she leaps onto his back, and he gives out an almighty scream. And as he runs away, Ben says, well, something like that, I guess. Now, none of us know how we would react when faced with the extraordinary, but for myself and many like me, the weird and the wonderful has become commonplace, and eventually we adjust to absorb it into our daily lives. Now, another little bit of fun here. Last year, it was my 60th birthday. I wanted to do a funny sort of skit, a funny mime to one of my manic songs that I'd written for Ben's World called Monster in the Cupboard, and I asked John if he would video it and put it on YouTube. And I dragged this jacket out of my wardrobe. I bought this in 1970. I could just about get it on. But unbeknownst to me, John, who draws my cartoon, he kept a couple of the images back and made this wonderful birthday card for me. And inside, this is what he put inside. Look, when the moon landing's faked, and here I am reflected in the visor, and then there's Ben there, juggling his balls. More mysterious phenomena on Easter Island, and Gordon is now turned into a stone statue, and I'm looking a bit surprised, and Ben's on his magic carpet. Now, I want to talk to you about this case. This is something I investigated in 1992 about a man who went on board a flying saucer back in 1964. In fact, it was reviewed in Nexus a couple of issues back, and they said it was a very important contribution to ufology. I mean, there isn't many cases from that sort of period. I spent 6 weeks interviewing this man, and I had about 12-15 hours of taped conversation, filed it away in all these boxes, and when I found this other early report, I came across this, and I sat and read it again, and I thought, well, what he was saying back then, it's really fitting in to where we are today. It was certainly, some of it was. So we decided to put it into a little booklet. It's only 92 pages, and I'm just going to give you some snippets, as I think it is a fairly important case. It was investigated in 1992. The first encounter, you see, it was in Longleat Forest in December 1964, just 5 miles from Warminster. And for any of you that know about Warminster, the Warminster Flap started on Christmas Day in 1964, went on to the late 1970s. I mean, all hell broke loose down there. They had public inquiries in the town hall because of things that were being seen, and there were so many people, they just poured right out, hundreds outside on the pavements. The cameras were there and all sorts of media. The second and third encounters happened in a gravel pit near Shepton Mallet. Now, the interesting thing about this particular gravel pit is that when I was going down there in the 70s and when I moved down there in 77, lots of strange lights were seen moving around the bottom of this gravel pit. And I interviewed one man who used to drive a digger there at night. And he told me that he refused to do night work there any longer because it scared him so much with these lights that were moving around the quarry bottom. And the first encounter was by accident, in inverted commas, apparently a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The next 2 encounters were by prior arrangement. There was to be a 4th and final meeting which George never kept. He regretted this deeply and desperately wanted to meet them again. So when he came on the scene with me, he said, "Do you think you could help me get back in touch with them?" And I said, "Well, I don't think I can help you. But if you really need to get back in touch, then just try and meditate and send your mind out to them, and if it is meant to be, it will be." Now, twice he actually broke down and we had to end 2 of the meetings prematurely. He broke down in tears because what he had been told at the time, he said that it wasn't fair for his grandchildren. He said, what sort of a world have they been brought into? Now, George lived in Nunney, which is a lovely little village between Frome and Glastonbury, and he was married with several children. As I say, twice the sessions ended early. And this is a couple of images of Nunney here. It's a lovely little village if ever you're down that way. Very attractive. Right, so as time passed and we entered the 1990s, the pressure of the messages given to him by the aliens, many of them relating to the end of the century and the early part of the next, wore on George, and he made attempts to pass on what he had been told. He wrote to the Ministry of Defence, the Air Ministry, the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and an organisation called Justice. None acknowledged his letters. He then contacted Jenny Randalls, who in turn passed it on to us. So during December 1964, an ordinary family man went for a stroll one evening and walked into a situation that changed his life forever. And as a result of what happened to him and the effect it had on him, he left his home and family and wandered the globe, seeking always to escape the inescapable. What he thought, they had told him that every person, every life form has an electrical signal, and they all have their own particular individual signal, and that's how they used to locate him. And they said, because they talked about these 2 other races that were here for not positive reasons, they did say that, yes, in answer to his question, they could use the same type of tracking. This worried him deeply, along with the MIB activity, which I'll just touch on in a moment, that those 2 things, he thought that if he kept on running, then they wouldn't be able to find him. But of course, he regretted that many years later. So it was December, he said, the beginning of December. I went to see my daughter in Frome. After I left, I went for a walk along the edge of the woods at Longleat, walking along happily when I was suddenly grabbed by 3 strange creatures. I was scared out of my wits. I thought they'd escaped from Longleat Safari Park. I hit out, and it was just like hitting something solid. I got a few scratches, and his anorak was torn. They were strange little creatures that apparently these other beings used they were supposed to keep anyone away from the craft for a certain amount of time, possibly due to radiation. and along with the scratches, etc., he was quite sort of damaged in a way. And they were wearing a one-piece matte grey outfit, including the feet. Another person came into the room, and it was obviously a woman. I thought, thank God, they're human. I was trained in the RAF to be observant and notice that neither the face nor the lips moved because they had no lips, just a slit. But he spoke to me in perfect English, no accent. He mentioned about his English, and they said that they spoke all languages and they'd been around for thousands of years. The creatures stood motionless, and that's when they explained to him that he would get some side effects from this. He said it caused an awful lot of scarring and blisters, and I still have a lot of the marks to this day. Then he explained to me how I got injured. See, they disobeyed their orders. They were supposed to keep anybody away from the craft for a while. They brought me what looked like a glass beaker with green stuff in it. It was like jelly that had not set. This was to nourish me and to also help me heal. They told me I had nothing to fear, and after a time of talking, I was free to go. There were 7.5 hours of conversation over 3 days. They mentioned 2 other forms of life coming here, not with good intentions, to create trouble, to create havoc. They've done it for many, many years, and they have been highly successful. He had a pleasant laugh like tingling glass. By this time, I was perfectly at ease with them. I thought that if they were going to harm me, they would have done it by now. He asked to see the controls. He said, I used to fly when I was young. I don't suppose you know, but we had a war. Oh, yes, we know. Well, we called it the Second World War. He said, yes, in the year 1939. We watched everything. That war was preventable. Everything is preventable, but there are forces at work to make sure these things are not prevented. Eventually, I was asked if I would like to meet them again, and I said yes. It was arranged to meet at the back of the quarry, where it was very quiet, 8 p.m. Thursday, and the final meeting was the following Saturday. They took me out of the craft and we walked a short distance. Do not look round, please, and walk the same distance again before looking back. I kept my ears open. It was dead quiet and I heard nothing. But when I turned round, there was nothing there. They had gone. I spent a long time training in the RAF and was trained to remember and observe. That never leaves you. I turned round and walked back. To this day, I'll never know why I turned round and walked back. I walked to the spot where I'd come out of whatever it was, and the air was warm. It was a winter's night, remember, but the air was warm in that spot. I started to walk back home. And on the way home, I thought, how do I explain this? With everything torn, these things, the creatures, had 3 talons and had ripped me all down my clothes, everything, deep into the chest and on my face. The next thing I remember is being inside a car. I was found lying beside the road by a police car. I was taken to Frome Hospital and then on to Bath. So George is visited by MIB. He has 2 more arranged visits at the quarry. Much is told to George that does worry him. As I say, twice the interviews had to be stopped. So George kept on the move. And there's an interesting correlation here with Jim Sparks's book that he mentions in The Keepers. He kept on moving from place to place after his encounters in the vain hope that they would not be able to find him, but they always did. So the second meeting, he said, I thought about it for days. I kept saying to myself, I'm going, I'm not going, I'm going. But I don't know, something compelled me, so I went. I drove my car to the pub on the right-hand side of the road. I pulled in there. I don't drink. I went to the pub and asked for a double whiskey. I drank it neat. I didn't realise you put water with it. I came out. I drove up past the quarry gates before I realised I was there. So I decided to find a lay-by. I couldn't find one. So I pulled off the road as far as possible and I walked back. I glanced at my watch and it was 7:45. The quarry gates were open. But I decided not to go in. I think I was scared. It was lonely looking in there. I walked slowly back towards the car. I lit a cigarette and leaned against the fence. Suddenly, I heard a voice say, "Good evening, you're punctual." I turned around and there he was. I asked, "Where did you come from?" He said, "Would you like to come with me?" I said, "Yes, certainly." We needed to be on the other side of the fence. I climbed over it, but he actually jumped over it from a standing position. It was about 3 or 4 feet high. I said, "I wish I could do that." He said, "Oh, anybody can do that if they want to. Come on, I have a surprise for you." And then he said he saw it in all its splendour, and he said it was big. He said, "I stopped still because it was so incredible." It really was incredible. He said, this is only a small one. We have one not too far away, probably in your terms, 3 miles long. A parent ship carries 200 of these craft. You mean there are over 200 of these things flying around? No, never more than 20 at a time, and never more than 3 in one area. Then he goes on about if they want to disappear, they just went into another dimension to escape the radar, etc. The controllers, he said, we have people on your world at the moment, many hundreds of people trying to get the message across, but nobody will listen because a few of your top people are under the control of these other beings from our galaxy. They are intent on only power, wealth and greed. Nothing else matters to them. And they are fully aware that they are actually destroying themselves and their descendants. We cannot understand that way of thinking. So he said, if everything is so good on your world, why do you come here? Because if you destroy your world, you destroy ours. It is as simple as that. We do not like wars. We are beaten wars. We now have a war against 2 other intelligent life forms, but not a war as you know it. We do not shoot each other or kill each other. We try to prevent each other. We are trying to prevent them. They are not using guns or technological weapons. They are using more insidious ways of creating wars by getting the people to fight amongst themselves and destroy themselves. And that was the end of the second meeting. I say these are just snippets. So the third and final meeting, the next time I walked to the quarry, as it was not far from the car park, again I stood at the same place. There was nothing in sight. It was a dark night, raining, drizzling. The agreed time of 8 p.m. came and went. I was just about to give up when, again, a voice spoke to me, stay. I turned around. There was no one. I thought I must be hearing things. A lot of queer things had been happening which made me question my own mind, my sanity. I was just about to walk away when a hand touched my shoulder and he said, we have had a slight delay. Come this way. Again, he jumped the fence. He just seemed to hop over it while I had to climb. We walked right round the quarry and up. This time, he was leading me. This time, I watched him. He did not take steps as we do. He seemed to be gliding. I was fascinated. His legs were not moving at all. He was slightly off the ground. I don't know. He must have been. It was rough terrain. I went up, and by the time we had got up the hill, I was a bit breathless. He turned and apologised immediately, saying, oh, I'm sorry, rest. So I rested, and all the while I looked down to see if I could see the craft. I didn't see anything. We kept on walking. He told me to wait. And then it just glided over, not a sound, a gorgeous sight. It was the same size. It just came down. The door opened, it opened down. Inside there was a light, a diffused light. It was a very strong light, but it didn't hurt the eyes. He took my arm and we went in. He must have lifted me about 3 feet to get in because they were about that height from the ground. Inside was a bare room, but this time he took me right to the top of the craft. There were another 2 men. At the top it was all windows, which I didn't see before from the outside, all little round windows. He said, this is our control room. The last question. So he said, so are we going to be in for a rough ride? Much rougher than you can imagine. It will escalate into the 1990s and those years will become increasingly difficult for you. A lot of the troubles in that period will be engineered by the controllers, will be controlled by people under their control on your own planet. People who will be obsessed because the idea will be placed in their minds by wealth and power. Nothing else will matter. The needs of the few will surpass those of the many. Do you understand that? The controllers look after their part in the galaxy very successfully. You are the only ones not being successful because you are not even trying. You don't want to try. I am sorry I have to say this to you, but you have to get that message across. Unless people will sharpen their minds and memories and remember and keep remembering and stop the rot that has set in on your world. So 2 reasons why he disappeared, as I said, was the MIB activity and this way of finding him through the electrical signals. That's where he talks about the frequency. Now, the MIB, he said, from what I was told, especially on the 3rd visit, I am terrified of what is going to happen because what he told me then in 1964 has come true with such incredible accuracy that I can't believe it. And there is a lot more to come, and it is coming so fast, it is quite incredible. He said, your world is controlled by so many who do not trust each other. We do not believe each other. who do not, and whose priorities are power and wealth. I didn't keep the 4th appointment, which was to be in February. I thought about it. I started having nightmares. 2 people came to the door one day and asked for me by name. I was out at the time. They came back that night. I saw them come up the garden path. They looked like 2 Mormons to me. They looked at me and said, "I hope you remember that you mustn't talk about what you have seen and heard, all right?" And they walked off. Then on the Sunday afternoon, these 2 men walked up to me as I was about to get into my car and said, "Good afternoon. I hope you have remembered what you were told." I said, "Who the hell are you?" One said, "That doesn't really matter. Just remember, keep what you have seen and been told all to yourself, and nothing will happen to your family." That happened 6 or 7 times altogether. For the sake of my family, I packed up and went. I moved to Manchester. I got a house. I left my wife our house. I gave her my bank book. I gave her everything, and I went off. I ran for my life, knowing full well I couldn't run away, really. I have grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and it worries me when I know they are not going to have a very good life ahead of them. So that's just a few snippets of that story from 1964. Now, the light beings. It was Saturday the 18th of June 1994 at 2:50 a.m. when something remarkable happened. Now, for 21 years I lived in the top of this large country house, and I had 10 large rooms, and all there was 2 night storage heaters and a coal fire. I have some health issues. I had 2 ruptured discs in the spine and damage to the nerves near my coccyx, done when I was 16, trying to successfully stop someone who was trying to jump off the top of a building. But I messed up my own life. Now, my back throughout my life has often gone many times, and I can be in bed for a few weeks while it's recovering. This was just such a time. It was in winter time, and my neighbour brought my mattress through into the living room, and after work she would come up and light the fire for me. But after I'd recovered from this, perhaps in the spring, I tried to go back to the bedroom and I couldn't. I tried several times and I would come out in a cold sweat and I didn't understand it at all, so I gave in. And for months I just dragged my mattress through every night and put it on the floor. Well, this particular night I woke up. Now, if anybody is coming, if it's my Space Brothers or there is grey activity, there are several things going on, but if I wake up in the night time, I will always wake up on my back, and my eyes will instantly open, and there is never any drowsiness. It was dark and I sat there. I knew something was imminent, so I just prepared my mind. Did not know what was going to happen. And then this golden funnel came through the window, and out of the funnel came hundreds of little star-like objects that came out and danced around the top of the ceiling. And out of the funnel came numbers and letters and symbols, and they done the same. Years later, I saw some ancient Hebrew, and some of those letters were very similar to some of these letters that came out of the funnel. But then out of the funnel started to come 2 beings of pure golden light. And when they were inside the funnel, they only looked about 6 inches long. But as soon as they come out into the room, and it happened so quickly, you couldn't see it happen, but they were about 6 feet 2 inches. And they came and hovered over me. And their eyes, their faces were no more than just a few inches from mine. And they were so incredibly beautiful, just brilliant golden light. And it was like they had been chiseled out of the finest marble. They were masculine and feminine energies, and then they entered my body, and as soon as they'd done that, there was this incredible burst of energy. My heartbeat started to increase. It was a phenomenal burst of energy. And then I saw this amazing white light, the most brilliant white light that you could ever imagine. And I knew I was going to go into this white light. And for that moment, I felt unworthy to go into such a place, but into this light I did go. And as soon as I was in this light, I was in complete and utter oneness. At this level, there simply was not any separation. There was no inside, no outside. It was like I was the universe and the universe was me. It was complete and utter oneness. But then I started to become aware of something else. There was something else even behind this oneness. And it seemed to be holding it all together. And it was quite simply love. Love with large capital letters, a universal, unconditional love. And what it was showing me is that everything that originally comes into being comes from love. Then these golden beings told me that these numbers and letters and symbols were going to go into my mind, and in each symbol was an encyclopedia of knowledge. And at some point in the future, the understanding of these symbols would be triggered either by my higher self or by them. I then came back out of this brilliant white light, and the golden beings came out of my body and went back through the funnel, and then the numbers and letters and symbols, and finally the hundreds of little stars, and the funnel was gone. And I laid there, and it was like I'd been plugged into the mains. My body was just vibrating, and it lasted for about 2.5 days. Now, this is something that Fran found out years later, that the ancient Egyptian right eye of Horus mystery school teachings involved a mixture of sacred geometry and meditation. And once he had reached a certain level, the initiate might experience the vision of a golden tube from which came numbers and symbols. And also years later, I came across Dolores Cannon. Some of you will know her. She's authored over 15 books. She constantly travels the world, and she's regressed over 1,000 people like myself. In fact, I had a 4-hour regression with her in London when she came over some years ago. But in her book, the first book, I think, of the Convoluted Universe, there's now 4, but it said in there, she said, it has happened too many times to be coincidence. She said that if a person is lying indoors, if they're lying on the couch or on a bed, this golden funnel would come through a window. If they are outside, this golden funnel would come down from the sky, and out of that funnel would come numbers and letters and symbols that would go into the person's mind. So something is happening here. I'll just briefly go into this now. UFO magazine, the late Graham Birdsall, this magazine came a couple of weeks after this experience, and in there was about these 2 fishermen. I got in touch with them because they'd seen this 300-foot disc as they were approaching Windermere, where I was living at the time. One of them didn't want to talk about it because it unnerved him too much, but the other one said he would, and he told me, I said to him, can you tell me where it was? So I can tell you exactly where it was, because we often come up to the Lake District fishing. Anyway, when he told me where it was and where it was going, it went right past my living room window, and it was the same night. I'm not saying that it was connected. Amazing coincidence. So after we had this missing time at Area 51, this amazing experience, and what were the light beings, I thought I needed to find out what's going on here. So when we came back to England, I found David Coggins. He's a retired bank manager. He lives down in South Wales, and he had been regressing people like myself for over 20 years, and he agreed to come up to my home. And he stayed for 5 days, and we looked into various of my experiences. Now, this one here, we wanted to look into this light being experience. That was my recliner in the foreground. That window there is where the funnel came through. And I was already in an altered state of consciousness. The recliner was fully reclined, and it was almost going flat. And my eyes were closed, and I suddenly pointed to the window over there, and I said, the light beings have returned. And David was apparently pointing to Fran to say, turn round, because she had lit a candle just here. And she said, it's just a normal flame candle, but as soon as I said the light beings had returned and they were over there, she said the flame shot up like this. I then asked for a notepad and pen, and David passed me an A4 notepad and a biro. Because I was holding the biro almost upside down, and if you try and write with that, probably 3, 4, 5 words, and it would cease to function. He suddenly realised that I'd started to write, and he tried to take the pen out of my hand to put a felt tip pen, and in a very authoritative voice I just said to him, leave me alone, I know what I'm doing. And I continued to write for over 1 hour of these symbols. And bearing in mind, they said that in each symbol was an encyclopedia of knowledge, and they also said that you can even, without knowing the full knowledge of these symbols, they said that if you meditate on these symbols, they will have some effect on your DNA. Page 1 was about the source and creation, and page 2 was a continuation. On page 4, it was a descent into matter, and this was the whole history of the human race, if you like, the soul's journey coming into 3D matter. In page 5, it was the ascension, and Fran said, when I was doing this, because my eyes were closed, I would write a line of symbols, then fill it with my run my fingers over it and then do the next line and then fill that. And when I got to this page, I'd done the symbols, felt with my hand, then I'd done the planet and felt with my hand, and then the radiating lines, and then the arrow, and finally the number 7 type symbol that occurs on more than one occasion with a dot on circumference there. So there was the ascension, and then there was the point of shift. Now, is this what I was telling my mother about in 1955 when I was 4 years old, that something of incredible importance is going to happen that will affect all units of consciousness? And I think this is what this is about. Now, page 7 and page 8 were just arrows to show how far above us the plane of the light beings was. On the strength of my book, I was invited over to the UFO Congress in Laughlin in Nevada in 2008, and the late Betty Mailer was over there, and she invited me to speak the following year at the Southern Ireland Conference. At the conference was Ross Hemsworth here, who was from Glastonbury Radio. That's his partner Penny. There was also Robert Salas. There was Mary Rodwell, Ian Crane, John Pickering, that draws my cartoon. He was there with his partner. They have done 2 books on light phenomena photography. He's got some amazing images. Now here, when I gave my talk and I put my symbols up, Ross called me over afterwards and he said, as soon as you put your symbols up on the screen, Robert Salas had his laptop here, and he turned it around to show it to Ross Hemsworth. He said, look, there's symbols here from one of the crashed craft, I believe from Roswell. He said, and they are identical with some of the symbols that Mike has put up on the screen. Now we'll just move on. Now, Robert Salas was Air Force captain. He was a missile launch officer at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana, for intercontinental nuclear Minuteman missiles. On the 24th of March 1967, air incident called Oscar Flight shutdown. UFOs outside the facility caused all 10 missiles under his control to be disabled. And in North Dakota, Wyoming, Missouri and New Mexico, in underground military facilities, 150 intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear armed, 60 feet underground in concrete capsules, were all disabled when UFOs appeared. Now, it was Daniel Sheehan that he was working under the Carter administration, and he was in this highly restricted, secretive room sorting out some paperwork, etc. And he came across the United States Air Force photo that was showing these symbols from the side of a crashed UFO. And what he'd done was he smuggled a piece of paper and a pencil, he sellotaped it under his armpit, and he copied down the symbols and smuggled it back out the same way. And this is what was shown on Robert Salas's laptop to Ross. So the audio of the next slide is a clip from Ross Hemsworth's radio show when, during a conversation with Stephen Greer, he mentions an incident that occurred at the conference. He mistakenly refers to my space brother when in fact he meant the light beings.
I'm in Ireland. I was speaking at the Irish UFO conference at the weekend with a number of other leading speakers, including Robert Salas. Now, Robert, you know, another ex-politics member. He was the man that was captain of the Maelstrom Air Force Base when the Minuteman nuclear missiles were shut down by a UFO back in '67. And he said that the story told to him by Sheehan was, I think it came direct from Sheehan, was that he was contacted by the president, who said he himself could not access the information from the White House. He then went into an archive. He was searched at the archive, told he could not take with him any photographic equipment, videos, notebook, pencils, but he sneaked in a notepad and pencil under his armpit. Now, apparently, while he was in there, he took notes of a crashed UFO and some markings on the side of this particular spacecraft.
Correct.
That's correct. Good. We're getting it so far, so good.
That was all during the Carter time. He was, as they were wounding up, they sort of, the initial study that Carter, you couldn't just shut it down like they did the SRI study. We're talking about the President of the United States.
Yeah.
Face had to be saved. Yeah, so what they did is they just sort of let it sort of die a natural death. They provided a few things. There was no cooperation from the CIA or NASA. But as sort of a sop, they did say, look, we're going to bring the Blue Book files in and give access to some designated people or whatever to look at this stuff. I don't know. We don't know everyone who was allowed to see it, but we know that one of those people was Danny Sheehan. And what had happened, either intentionally or by accident, it's not clear, is that when they brought the files in to be examined, they stuck them in the basement of the new Congressional Library at the time. I think it was even under construction or almost finished. So it's pretty isolated. Had a guard and so forth. The files included some classified stuff that was not public, but classified behind, the scenes blue book stuff. And it was in some of the microfiche that Danny came across a number of photographs of a crash saucer in a snowbank with military people around it, what have you. And it was off of that photo that he traced some markings from the sighting. And it was a pretty stunning thing for him. Obviously, it just caught him, I think, just off guard. And he approached the Jesuits who he was working for, wondered if they wanted to pursue it. They said no. He made, I think, a proper decision to put it aside and revisit it another day.
No,
He did in 2000.
The interesting thing about this, Stephen, is that the markings that he took off that spaceship were identical to the ones that Mike Oram was showing during his presentation, that he said he was given by a space brother, i.e. someone that he believes he's related to from another planet. He was giving these markings in his presentation. Robert was sitting next to me on the side of the hall and just turned his laptop round to me and said, look at these. And he showed me exactly the same markings that Mike Oram was giving in his presentation, which I found astounding.
Right, there we can see that's Robert Salas, and there's John Pickering there and Mary Rodwell. Now, the very first time I showed these symbols was when I gave a talk at the Probe conference in Blackpool in 2008. A chap there that I sort of knew, he asked if he could video my talk, and I said, yes, that's fine. After the talk, he came up to me looking rather perplexed. He said, I don't understand this at all. He said, it's never happened before. He said, but I fully charged the battery the night before. He said, and I even gave it an extra 10 minutes to make sure it was fully charged, and that would have given me 2.5 hours of playtime. He said, halfway through your talk, which was about 30 minutes, he said, as soon as you put the very first page of symbols on the screen, he said, I was looking through the viewfinder and I could see the 5 lights were still saying that the batteries were fully charged. He said, when all of a sudden all the lights went off, the battery totally drained, and he apologised that he didn't get the second half of the talk. So I don't know why that happened. A friend of David Coggins, who'd done my regressions, Phil, he lives on the Isle of Wight, and he knows this psychic lady who he holds in reasonably high regard. He put my set of symbols into a sealed brown envelope and gave them to the lady and asked her what she could say about what was inside. Now, I'll just give you some notes on what she said. She didn't know what was in there. She said, there's symbols in here and they're waking us up. Well, this is what the light beings told me. She said, there's words here that I do not understand. She said, there's healing involved. Again, the light beings said that. She mentioned Area 51, which was interesting. She said, there's material. She went on to say it was a metal that was not known. She mentioned the brilliant white light and going into a tunnel that goes upward, which could be the funnel. She said, falling into the wrong hands, they are dangerous, and you have to go into a state of nothingness to understand their meaning. And whoever works with them, she said, needs protection. They cannot do this on their own. And she finished off by saying that this is the dawning of a new day. So this is what I'm being told, which would fit in with what the light beings said, how the symbols could affect us. The light beings, said both to Mike and specifically in answer to Fran's question that the symbols and their meanings are locked in our DNA, and to unlock them we need to go within. And Mike, under regression, said, yes, this is the shift. It's in our DNA, it's here, we have it. Again, in her book, The Convoluted Universe, Dolores Cannon tells of a client who also received symbols in a similar way to Mike, and under hypnotic regression, Jay says that the information is coming into her everywhere and that she feels like a sponge. So if this information goes directly into the DNA, then it would be everywhere. And this is an odd thing that happened to me. Last year, with my 60th birthday, which was May the 6th, on May the 5th, I was sitting at the computer, 9:50 p.m, and I suddenly was told, telepathically I suppose, to go outside with my camera, but they said, don't take the small compact camera, take your large digital SLR camera and put your external flash gun on top. And I think if I hadn't have done that, the light would not have penetrated far enough into the field. So I put it all together, I put batteries into the flash gun and went outside, and I took 15 shots. The very first shot I took was of these, I just called them shooting orbs, I wasn't too sure what they were. 15 shots, and then the phenomena, whatever it was, just stopped. And then it was my birthday on the 6th, and on the 7th, I was back on the computer, this time 10 p.m, and I was told again, go outside with that camera. Now it was sitting on the kitchen top, so I just grabbed it and went outside, and I got another 45 shots, and then it just stopped. Now, bearing in mind I was told to go out and capture this. Now, while I was taking these images, when you lighten them in Photoshop, in some of them there's over 100 because it goes right back into the field. But I was told when I was doing capturing these images that these are a form of consciousness and they were leaving the earth plane because of the change in frequencies. That's my balcony outside my front door, and they were even coming through the floor of the balcony where I was standing. I'll just quickly run through these because of the time. This is only some of them. I've never got them since, and I've never had them before. I mean, I'll get orbs, so you can capture orbs very easily, but I've never had anything like this. And it was on every single photo, and then it just stopped, both times. And that thing in the middle here, I didn't know what that was, so when we enlarged it, still didn't know what it was. When these are lightened up, that you can see a lot more. So there were 60 images in all. And then it just stopped. Earlier on in that year, February, again I was told to go outside, but they said go into the small garden. I just took my compact camera, and this was the very first shot. And I thought that must be some sort of orb or something flashing by, and there's an orb in front of the gate. The next shot was about 15 seconds later, and it was still there. Now, the interesting thing about this is John Pickering, as I say, who draws my cartoon, him and his partner have some incredible light phenomena photography, and they've got a lot of stuff around the grounds here. But they have got several shots of like a tall, thin streak of light, and when you enlarge them, you can see orbs inside them, and they're actually coming out of another end. It's almost like it's like a portal. So it's interesting that was still there in the same place 15 seconds later. But then the next shot I got was that now the image is stretched here, so you can't quite see it in the PowerPoint. So I'm just going to move forward a bit here. When I first met who I call the tulip people, I'll give you a better image in a moment, the tulip people, and I've been involved with them with hybrid children, and I've actually been taken back to meet these children, which isn't it's an emotional thing to do, but their head, on the front of the book it's not right, their head actually goes back and it's just got a V in the middle. It's almost like it's just split a bit as it goes back. See it closer there. Now this, I think, is its energy form. It's 18 feet tall, and they are tall. You can see if that is its legs over the wire fence, if that is its torso and its arm, and that's where its head splits in two directions. Bearing in mind, I was told to go outside and go to the small part of the garden. I don't normally, so I normally just stand on my balcony. It's not quite like that. It's a bit different. And this was the image afterwards, just to the right. So if it was its energy form, was that it shooting away? I don't know. So I have to leave the Area 51 experience. I mean, that's where we were. We were down in Boulder, near Boulder, where the conference was. There's 800 to 900 people in the audience. It goes on for 9 days. Went up through here and onto extraterrestrial highway here, Highway 375. This is all Area 51. It's supposed to be the size of Switzerland. They said it would take 2.5 days to drive around it. And that's the first view you get of the Groom Lake Road, where you drive down for 14 miles until you get to the infamous barrier. And that was on the start of the Groom Lake Road. Now, my strange illness of 1958, I'd like to share this with you. I've never mentioned this until a couple of months or so back, really. It started on the first day of my 6-week school holiday. So I was 7. And it finished on the last day of my 6-week holiday. I was in bed all this time. I don't know why, but my doctor, it was my family doctor, or appeared to be, and she came every day and injected me in the backside. And sometimes there would be 2 men in suits that would stand by the bottom of the bed. I questioned my mum about this for years and years and years. I never understood it. I used to say to her, what was wrong with me? She said, well, at one point, she said, I thought we were going to lose you. You nearly died. And I said, well, if I nearly died, why wasn't I in hospital? And she said, well, there were no beds. So, I mean, that seems odd anyway. I said, what did they want? And they used to give, there was little brown ball bearings. And my mum had to feed me them, and they were awful, every 2 hours around the clock. And she said they were wanting something that was going to come out of you, and she had to look for it in case I went to the toilet. And she said, I said, and did it come out? She said, yes, it did come out in the end. I said, what did you do with it? She said, I had to hand it over to these two men. So I said, what did it look like? Now, bear this in mind, because she said, well, she said it was an orange tree. I said, what do you mean an orange tree? She said, it was an orange tree growing inside you. They said, you must have swallowed an orange pip. Do you know, for years, I'm not joking, for years, I didn't eat oranges. I was so scared of swallowing another orange pip. I used to tell people, I used to feel quite proud of it as a kid. Well, I had an orange tree growing inside me. I mean, they probably thought I was odd anyway, but it didn't probably help. I said, what did it look like? She said, well, it looked like it had roots and branches. So just bear that in mind, because 2002, I was washing my car. It was a really hot day, and I was kneeling down washing one of the wheels, and one of my neighbours came home, and she got out of her car, and she come over to say hello, and she said to me, what's that lump on your back? It was about the size of a 10-pence piece, just down here. So I said, I don't know. I said, that's been there for years. I said, I've asked a couple of doctors, and they didn't know what it was, and they said it must be a cyst, but if it didn't hurt, just leave it. She said to me, I think it's a blackhead. I said, a blackhead? She said, yeah, because I can see something in the centre of it. So do you want me to try and get it out? So I said, well, all right then. So she started sort of squeeze, I could feel a squeeze in it, and all of a sudden she said, oh, a bit of it's popped out. I'm going to pull it out. And I could feel her pulling it out, and all of a sudden I heard her say, oh my God, what the hell is that? So I turned round, it was probably about that long, and it was all wet, but it quickly dried out and it opened out. And I made this sketch of it. Now, is this what my mum was talking about when she said it had roots and branches? I took it up into my flat, I took it into the bathroom, I got some toilet tissue, and I laid it on this toilet tissue, and I went to get a clean jam jar, brought the jam jar back, picked it up to put it in the jam jar, and just immediately turned and went over to the toilet and flushed it down the toilet. And I was really upset about doing this, and I couldn't stop myself. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the following year, and some of you may have seen this, it's an excellent series by Steven Spielberg, Taken, follows the generations of a couple of families with alien abduction, etc. It's 10 episodes, it's about 15 hours. And on the start of each episode, there's a few quick clips, and it's the same clips at the start of each episode. And on one of the clips, it shows you there's the father and the son who have implants. And when they took one out, and this is what I photographed on the TV screen, it opened out, just like when that one dried and quickly went into its shape. And this is identical to what was taken out of my back. And how close is this? I don't know, because my mum isn't alive now, to the orange tree that was growing inside me. They said on the programme that it was a tracking device. Now, the interesting thing about this, I used to have a lot of problems with greys. I don't talk about it much. I try and keep a positive picture because there's a lot of spiritual stuff out there that is, for me, far more important. But I was taken for years, and sometimes it was 3, 4, 5 times a week. A high percentage of why I was taken was the extraction of sperm. Very draining, very tiring. Sometimes I used to wake up and it was not very pleasant at all. When it was at its height and I was being taken about 5 times a week, I said, right, this is enough. You've got to stop. I'm fed up with this. I'm not going to allow it anymore. And it stopped. But thinking back, it was around this time, 2002, when this happened. And I suddenly realised if it was a tracking device, did it stop once you pulled it out of my back? Because it was the same time. I don't know. The trouble is all this stuff, there's too many questions and never enough answers. Right, the harmonic convergence, 8th of November 2003, my friend in New Zealand, she's a psychic lady, she works through a guide called Solar, And I got an email from her. It was, I read it about 11 o'clock in the morning, and it said that today is Harmonic Convergence Day, and she asked her guide, when was a good time for me, geographically here, to tune in? She said, because the worlds come closer together, and you can make some sort of wishes, but be careful what you wish for. Well, I thought, I don't think I need to do that. So I carried on doing my emails. You know what it's like? Time just flies. Next thing I knew, it was about 3:30. He said 4 o'clock was the time. So I thought, I've got to get away from the computer. I thought, I'll go up the lane and I will just go and meditate. Now, I lived here for 21 years, and that's where I lived. I had the whole of the top. This is where the funnel came through. And I went for a walk up the lane. It's a lovely lane. I mean, I walked up there over 1,000 times. I walked up here, past the crossroads, I went past the crossroads, came back, and I sat on the bench. I sat on the bench there, and I closed my eyes and started to meditate, and within 2 minutes, I suddenly became aware of an energy on my right-hand side near where those daffodils are. Now, normally, if my space brother Telos is coming, I know whether it's a few seconds, a few minutes, even an hour, several hours, and I just prepare myself. This was a time when it totally took me by surprise. I opened my eyes and looked, and there he was with that. He has this sort of glint in his eye, you know, when he knows he's going to tell me something interesting. And he put his hand up like he does here, and I'd done the same. And then opposite me, there was a sheep looking through the fence here, the gate here. And he must have seen everything, or she, and often wonder what he thought about it, because a portal opened. Now, this portal was identical to the portal, or almost identical, to the portal that opened in Area 51 that we were forced to go through at gunpoint, where we ended up in some, which possibly underground base. We really don't know. But this portal opened up, and Telos said to me that I could go through that portal now and go back home. And he said, you've done enough good in this world, he said, that you will not suffer any karma from doing this. And I thought about it for a while, and I thought, well, I want to write this book. And I thought, and if we do have these changes, there's going to be a lot of confusion. And I've spent my whole life. Back in the 70s, I was talking about these changes, and I thought, if people need help, I want to be just a part of that. I want to play my little part. So I said, I explained that to him, and he just said, well, okay, that's your choice. But then I suddenly thought, oh, goodness me, have I made the right choice? What have I done here? And then I said to him, look, if I stay, I need something to happen that is so in your face, that is so odd, that I know I've made the right decision. And then the portal closed, and he put his hand up like this, and then he slowly just dematerialised. And I closed my eyes again, and again, no more than 2 minutes passed when I heard these footsteps running towards me really fast. And as they got closer, I thought, well, I better open my eyes. And there was a man who had this dog on one of those extending dog leads, and it was fully extended. And he was saying to me, as he's running along, he was saying, it's all right, she wants to get under the bench. She's frightened of all the traffic. Now, you don't get any traffic up this lane. I've been up there 45 minutes now, but you could be up there for hours, you might get one car. And I said to him, he said, do you mind if I sit down? I said, no. And I said, what do you mean about all this traffic? I said, I've been here 45 minutes. And I said, there hasn't one car passed. No, he said, but it does at 10 to 5. And I thought, I've got some nutter here sitting next to me. What's all this about? And so then I said to him, I love this lane. I said, I've walked up here 1,000 times, I said, and it still feeds my soul. And he said, I've lived here for 14 years. And he said, I've lived here for 30 years. So I said, well, where? I said, there's only 9 houses. I've never seen you. And then he said, I've been all around the world, he said, but there's nowhere as lovely as this lane. So I said, yeah. I said, but in the winter, I said, it can get very snowy and very icy. And he said, oh, yes, I know, he said. And the main road from Windermere, it came down here by those trees. And then the lane here went up to my house up here. There was one little pull-in place just there, and there is a car there now. He said, we were coming home, he said it was midnight, he said it was deep snow. This is 300 feet above sea level here. You've got the most weird weather. And there was one time when Fran, some years ago now, when Fran was with me, staying with me, and supposed to have gone out, I think it was New Year's Eve, to a party, and we rung them up in Kendal, 8 miles away, and said we can't go because were absolutely inundated with snow. And they said they thought we were lying because there wasn't even rain in Kendal. It had a strange weather system here, and it was deep snow. And he said he managed to get as far as where that car is, then he said I just had to stop. He said, and I got out, he said, and I thought, I can't leave the car here just in case someone else tries to get down. He said, so I tried to push it into the field. He said, but it was hopeless trying to push it through this deep snow. He said, and all of a sudden these 3 girls appeared. They just appeared, he said, they weren't even dressed properly, like in T-shirts. And one of them said, you all right then, Pop? And he said, no, he said, I'm trying to get my car pushed into that field. Get inside, we'll push you. He said, and they just pushed me through this deep snow into the field. He said, I got out to thank them and they were gone. He said, it was a full moon. He said, it was clear, really bright. You could see right up the lane both ways, and they were nowhere to be seen. He said, I went back to the car and I said to the wife, because she was still sitting in the car, and he said, I said to her, those 3 girls, he said, they've disappeared. She said, what do you mean they've disappeared? They've just pushed you into this field. He said, I'm telling you, they've disappeared. He turned around to me and he said, don't you just love stories like that? And I said, yeah, I do. It's fascinating. He said, right, I've got to go now, he said. It'll be 10 to 5 soon, and there's going to be all that traffic. And off he went, and he stood up the top here, and he turned around, and he just shouted out, if I see the 3 girls, I'll let you know. And he was gone, and I was sitting there, and I thought, well, how weird's that? What's the chances of that happening just 2 minutes after I said to my space brother, I need something so in your face that I know I've made the right decision. So that was rather odd. So I'm going to just sort of leave you here with Ben, lighten your load, enjoy life, sleep soundly, make time to play, expect the unexpected. And we're finishing with Ben Gordon. I've been thinking, if the universe started with a big bang, who lit the fuse? Well, God, I suppose. There wouldn't have been anyone else around. Yeah, but what puzzles me is, where did he buy the matches? So that's Ben. That's me and John and our characters. That's the Zen of Ben we done, the cartoon guide to life and the cosmos. That's my book, Does It Rain? And that's the other book I've told you about, Alien Interface, and somewhere out there we all are, and thanks very much for your time.
Well, I think that was really enlightening, and we're just going to have to do another conference at some time.
And I'll tell you about Area 51 if you want me to. I'm just a bit self-conscious of it now because it's been told so many times.
Seems so bad.